Now that we understand a little bit about ASP.NET configuration, let's see how to deploy an application and how to change configurations on a deployed website. First, let's understand that when we build an MVC application, we're just producing a DLL file with the application logic inside. That's going to sit in the bin subdirectory of our project. DLL files don't execute by themselves. They need some sort of host process to load them. And for websites, that host process is also responsible for delivering HTTP requests to the logic inside the DLL. We've been using IAS Express as the host for our application so far. And IAS Express makes things easy because it runs with our identity and we can start and stop the web server whenever we need to. But if you're deploying an application for real on the internet or intranet, chances are you'll be using the full version of Internet Information Services. You can install IAS on nearly any version of Windows. It is off by default on nearly all versions, so you might need to go into Windows Features to install it. Let me show you how that works. Here on this machine, I want to be able to run the application using Internet Information Services. But the first thing I'll need to do, I think, is install Internet Information Services. The easiest way to check and see if IIS is installed is to just go to localhost on the default port of the machine, and if Internet Explorer comes back and says that it wasn't able to reach anything, then chances are IIS is not installed. Now I'll go to Programs and Features in Windows, and under here I'll click on Turn Windows Features on or off. This brings up a list of system components that I can install, so let me go to Internet Information Services. It is off by default, and what I want to do is, first of all, make sure I install the IIS Management Console. That's useful if you need to configure IIS. I'm also going to install some application development features, so I want it to be able to run ASP.NET. And I'm also going to add some common HTTP features that I work with, including HTTP errors, directory browsing, HTTP redirection, and static content. Given those selections, let me click OK, and Windows will take a few minutes to install these features. Windows has just finished setting up IIS, so let me come back out to Internet Explorer and refresh, and you can see that we're now running IIS 7, IIS 7.5 in fact. And now I'm going to take one additional step. Because we installed the .NET Framework before we installed IIS, I want to make sure that ASP.NET is properly configured, ASP.NET 4 is properly configured for IIS. So I'm going to open up a command prompt as administrator, and we're going to go to the .NET 4.0 installation directory. That's the same place where we had the configuration file. So it's under Microsoft.NET Framework. There'll be the version 4, and it's inside of here, so not in the config directory, but inside of this directory where I can run a program called ASP.NET _ regias. I'm going to pass in a -i to say initialize and install. This will make sure that ASP.NET 4.0 is properly configured under IIS. And now that that is finished, I want to try a deployment. So first, let me show you that the easiest way to try to publish this to the local host is to right-click on the web application and select Publish. Before I show you any of these settings, let me just go ahead and click Publish, but you'll see that there's going to be an error dialog that basically says, to do this with a real web server, you need to be in administrator mode. And that's one of the differences between IAS Express and the real IAS, in that IAS Express runs under my account. I can do anything with it, break into it, kill the process. The real web server running IAS, I need to be an administrator to do pretty much anything with the IAS. So let me right-click on Visual Studio and run it as an administrator. And then I can open up the Ode to Food project, and we can try this again. So now that I'm running this as an administrator, if I right-click and say Publish, then I can select my Publish settings. I want to use the web deploy publish method. The destination is going to be localhost, and where I want this placed is in the root of the default website. So I don't want to go to http:/localhost/odefood. I just want to go to localhost and have the application there. And now that that is in place, let me click Publish. And here in the output window, you'll be able to see it build the package, see it push files up to the web server. And with the application in place, let's try to go to localhost again. And now we are probably going to run into a second problem. And this is another difference between IIS Express and IIS. When I'm running under IIS Express and I connect to a database, I'm making that connection as myself. And my identity has permissions in the database to create databases and drop databases and read things from any database. But when I'm running under IIS, I'm running with different credentials. Let me open up the task manager and show processes from all users. And we'll see this w3wp.exe process. That's the IIS worker process. That's the executable that really hosts our application, and that's where it's running. And you can see that it's running under this identity default app pool. So there are a couple different solutions to this problem, but ultimately what I have to do is I have to give this identity some permissions in the database, at least permissions to be able to read information and write information into that database. And I already have a script worked out for this. So let me go to the project directory and go into a directory called SQL. And what I want to do is execute this bit of SQL code. It's going to create a login for the IIS app pool default app pool identity. It's going to create a user for that login in the database, and it's going to give that user reading and writing privileges inside of ODFODB. To execute this script, one of the easiest ways is just to use a command line utility called SQL command. I'm going to tell it to connect to SQL Express, and I'm going to tell it to use an input file of grant.sql. Let's just run this. It seems to have run successfully. Let's refresh this page one more time. And now I have the application running under IIS.